Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation. Earlier this past weekend, I made a video about this game right here, which was Super Bowl 25 between the New York Giants and the Buffalo Bills. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, to make a long story short, that video really highlighted the underappreciated work of the grounds crew and all that they have to do in order to get ready for a game. Even if it means breaking into a nearby stadium and stealing 1,000 square feet of sod in the middle of the night because some kids destroyed the field the day before the game as part of the halftime show. And you just expect a field to be done perfectly. You expect all of the yard lines to be painted and to be straight. You expect all of the logos to be accurate. And you expect every field at every stadium in the NFL, when it comes to basic things like the arrows and the yard lines and the distance between everything and the colors of everything, to look identical and to look uniform. Get the job right, and no one notices. Get the job wrong, however, and...
Hey, that's great. But who are the chefs?
Yeah, remember that iconic commercial? It might be one of the greatest commercials in history, and it's still remembered roughly 3 decades later for how iconic it is. But it's true. Get it wrong, get something like painting the field wrong, and everyone notices. I've never done a video in my life about a grounds crew that painted the field right. You're not going to see me doing a video about a Giants-Eagles game from 1971 where I say that this game lives on in history more than half a century later, because the crew painted the 10-yard line and the 20-yard line exactly 10 yards apart from each other. That's expected. That's part of the job. It's like a dog bites man, man bites dog scenario. Because if you paint the field wrong, it's going to live on in history. And folks, have we got quite the story today regarding an insane controversy regarding a time where the grounds crew actually screwed up one of the simplest things in the world. The time before this game that the Jaguars played the Saints in Jacksonville, it got remembered throughout NFL history because of the iconic River City relay ending, where the Saints nearly tied the game on a lateral palooza play, only to then miss the extra point. And this game from 2011, as in the next meeting between the teams in Jacksonville, it lives on more than a decade later because of another bizarre thing that, to my knowledge, we have never seen before and have never seen since. Because this is the story behind what has to be the strangest controversy in the history of the venue now known as Everbank Stadium, and maybe one of the strangest controversies regarding a field in NFL history. Before I talk about the controversy in question, we need some context to understand what was taking place during the game, how the game was going, and how every other NFL field looked. And as you're watching some of these highlights, you might be able to notice the problem right away. If you don't notice the problem, don't worry. We'll get to that. It's October 2nd, 2011. It's week 4 of the NFL season. And as we hit the quarter mark of the year, we've got an interconference battle between the New Orleans Saints and the Jacksonville Jaguars at Everbank Field. Yes, it's called Everbank Stadium now, and back then, it was called Everbank Field. Why they couldn't just revert back to that name, I don't know, but that's neither here nor there. For the main subject in our story, the Jaguars, this is a big game for them. They sit at 1-2 after 2 straight losses, and they really can't afford to drop below 500 in what would be the first time since 2003 that they're below 500 after 4 games. It's not going to be easy. The Saints are a much better team on paper. They're favored by 9 points, and the Jags are starting rookie quarterback Blaine Gabbert in what is his first ever home start, even though he didn't really win the job, as he looked god-awful in the preseason. But rather, everyone else lost it, as David Garrard got released at the end of the preseason following a luncheon, and Luke McCown had maybe the worst game I've ever seen by any Jags quarterback in Week 2 against the Jets. But hey, Crazier things have happened. Unfortunately, these crazy things would not transpire down in Jacksonville today. Because holy cow, this game was bad. This game was ugly with a capital U on so many levels. As never, not for 1 second, no matter how close the score got, did you ever think the Jags had a legitimate chance to win the game. In a game that was total domination, the Saints prevailed by a final score of 23-10, in a game that wasn't even that close. At no point did the Saints ever trail, and at no point did the Saints ever even have the game tied outside of 0-0. The Saints doubled the Jaguars in first downs, winning that battle 30-15. The Saints just about doubled the Jaguars in total yardage, winning that battle 503-274. Whereas the Jaguars were terrible in crucial situations, going 4 for 18 on 3rd and 4th down combined, the Saints were 8 for 15. New Orleans nearly doubled the time of possession that Jacksonville had, controlling the ball for 37 minutes. And whereas the Jaguars had no answers for stopping tight end Jimmy Graham, who had 10 catches for 132 yards and a touchdown, the Saints had all the answers for stopping Blaine Gabbert, who went just 16 for 42, completing a mere 38% of his passes on a perfectly sunny day, and having 170 net passing yards. And even that is misleading, because 47 of those yards came on a screen pass. The Jaguars did not score on any of their final 6 drives, scoring no points in the second half by punting twice, throwing an interception, and turning it over on downs 3 times. Look, this game was just bad and embarrassing for the Jaguars on so many levels. And it wasn't just bad and embarrassing for the team on the field, because amazingly enough, it was even more bad and embarrassing for the team working on the field. As you're watching the footage now on this side of the field, whether it's a positive play for the Jags or a positive play for the Saints, just to highlight what that side of the field looked like, do you notice something bizarre about the field? Or rather, the side of the field that all these plays are taking place on? Honestly, maybe you don't. The field looks like it's in good condition, so it's not like players are slipping and sliding all over the place and getting hurt. But something just feels off. Even if you don't know what it is, and you can't quite put your finger on it, something's not right. It's almost like if I show you this logo of Google. You sense that something's up and something doesn't look right, but you don't quite know what it is or what it's supposed to look like. You have a feeling that the letters are the wrong colors, but if asked what the colors are supposed to be for each letter, odds are, you might not know. Something's up with this field and it looks different from every other field, but you might not be able to articulate what it is. And honestly, that's okay, because this is something that, at least to my knowledge, I have never seen take place at any other field in my life. It is something so second nature that you take it for granted. But man, what an embarrassing mistake this was. For some perspective, here is how a traditional NFL field looks. The same thing applies to college and high school and just about every single level of football. Notice something about the arrows next to the number indicating the yard line? That's right, they indicate the direction to the nearest end zone. It makes it super easy for television to see which way the team is going, especially back in the day when there were no scoreboards. But if you ever get lost in terms of which way you're going, a la Jim Marshall in the 1960s during the wrong way run, you've got the arrows on the field telling you where the nearest end zone is. If you're inside the 50 on the side going to the northern end zone, the arrows will point you toward the northern end zone. And vice versa. If you're inside the 50 on the side going to the southern end zone, the arrows will point you toward the southern end zone. In total, there are arrows at the 10, the 20, the 30, and the 40, with an arrow on each side, and both arrows on that same yard line facing the same direction. So if you're at the 10, you'll see an arrow to your left pointing you to the end zone 10 yards away, and an arrow on your right pointing you to the end zone 10 yards away. You won't see an arrow pointing you to the end zone 90 yards away. Does that make sense? And something like this is straight up in the NFL rulebook. Here's the 2023 rulebook for reference, and how the field is supposed to look. That's what you've been looking at this whole time. And Rule 9 of the field marking says, A white arrow is to be placed on the ground adjacent to the top portion of each number, with the exception of the 50, with the point being formed by the two longer sides pointing toward the goal line. Again, pointing toward the goal line. Oddly enough, it doesn't say what the penalty is for getting this wrong or for screwing this up. Nor would I know the penalty because, sure enough, nothing happened during the Saints-Jaguars game in 2011. Where now that you know what this is, you can see what the problem is clear as day. Because on this day in 2011, it wasn't just the Jaguars offense that was having trouble finding the end zone. It was also their grounds crew. Because the grounds crew broke the rules and screwed up absolutely badly. Notice the arrows here? Yep, as people watching the game pointed out, they are facing the wrong way. When you were closer to the northern end zone, there was one set that was right, and then there was one set that was pointing to the southern end zone 90 yards away. What's bizarre about this is that this has quite literally never been an issue before in a Jaguars game. For some perspective, this game against the Saints was the second home game the Jaguars had all season. At Game 1 against the Tennessee Titans, this is what the field looked like. The arrows are pointing in the right direction, as you can see with these highlights. The arrows pointed in the right direction for every game in 2010, and 2009, and 2008, and 2007, and well, you get the idea for every game going back to the franchise's first in 1995. It's like second nature. It's like tying your shoe. And yet, somehow, the grounds crew screwed up here. Somehow, they forgot which way the arrows went. And no one, not one singular person, noticed this mistake at the start. Not one person from the Jaguars or from SMG, the company responsible for painting the field, and the company that manages just about every venue in downtown Jacksonville, realized until the literal day of the game, as everyone was on the field, that the arrows were not all pointing toward the nearest end zone, and half of them on one side of the field were going in the wrong direction. And man, did people poke fun at the Jaguars for this situation. Dan Hansis, a writer for the NFL, said, "Call us cynics, but we don't believe this was some accident by a bumbling grounds crew intern. Something Machiavellian was at play in Jacksonville. Trust me, Dan, the Jags were not cheating by doing this. We had enough trouble finding the end zone with our 28th ranked offense as it was. We don't need it to be any harder." Andrew Dawes, a writer for the New York Times, said on this, "The grounds crew preparing Everbank Field for Sunday's game against the Saints managed to get an F in Field Painting 101, as half of the arrows beside the marker on the Jaguars side of the field inexplicably pointed to the wrong end zone. So remember that as you settle into work this morning, no matter how bad your Monday goes, it can't be worse than the Sunday the Jags operations staff just experienced. Not only did they discover the mistake while surrounded by 62,000 witnesses, but they couldn't do a thing about fixing the field until the Saints and the Jaguars were finished using it. And even though the grounds crew painted over the arrows 1 hour after the game to cover up any of the evidence that millions of people already saw on TV, by that point, it was too late. The damage had been done. This was a colossal screw-up, and there's no way around it. The bad news for the Jaguars is that the following week against the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 5, they played at home at Everbank Field and lost 30-20, thanks to yet another terrible game by this man right here, Blaine Gabbert. Why I have his jersey, I have no clue. Jags fans were down bad back then. And thanks to a terrible pump by Matt Turk in the fourth quarter, where he shanked a punt so bad that the Bengals started the drive in the red zone. Seriously, he was so bad with the Jaguars. He might be one of the worst free agent signings the Jags have ever made. But I'm getting off topic here. The good news, at least, was that unlike the game between these two teams behind me, the next time the Jaguars played at home, all the arrows were pointing in the same direction. They were pointing the right way. The field looked like an NFL field. More than I can say about what happened the previous week. So, I'll take it. Oh my god, that 2011 season was so brutal. If you're watching this video at the time of its release, then tomorrow, you'll know that the New Orleans Saints and the Jacksonville Jaguars are playing in front of a large audience on Thursday Night Football. So if anyone on the grounds crew for the Saints at the Superdome is watching this, just a quick word of advice. Everything you see in these highlights is wrong. The arrows are supposed to point toward the nearest end zone. 4 arrows on the Jaguars sideline are supposed to point north, and 4 are supposed to point south. It's not all 8 pointing in the same direction. I know it seems like common sense, but somehow your opponents screw that up. Almost like screwing up the section on the test where you write your own name. Because on this day in 2011, the Jaguars found a way to embarrass themselves even more than they had all season, even if it was technically SMG's fault and not the Jags. Either way, no matter whose shoulders the blame, no one involved was fielding good. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.